The acting president of Venezuela, Delcy Rodriguez, is set to visit India tomorrow, days after the US Secretary of State Marco Rubio winded up his visit in India. And his remarks about Venezuelan crude and the USA's interest of selling as much of energy to India had made global headlines. Now, while the Indian opposition parties led by the Congress had accused the government of succumbing to US pressure, the devil always lies in the details, and that's what we are going to learn from Sumit Ritolia about how easy it is going to be for India to incorporate Venezuelan crude into India's energy needs, and also whether or not it is suitable for the Indian refineries, which have for the several years been accustomed to the Russian Urals and also the Persian Gulf, the traditional oil from the Persian Gulf. Sumit, welcome to India Abroad. Thank you so much for sparing your time. I know it's very valuable these days. You are much in demand. Tell me how it's been. How does the energy, milieu of India look to you at the moment? What is going on?
Yeah, thank you, Shika. And I think you hit the right note. Like it's been interesting times for all of us covering energy and all. But yeah, I think if you look forward, like how the situation was in March and 3 months down the line, I think India in terms of crude oil import has done a remarkable job. I think credits where it's due. I think May India's import is almost flat year on year, though we are not importing much from Middle East. So this speaks a lot about how much focus has been more into diversification and your point on the topic of the day, that is Venezuelan crude. And I think it's not new into the Indian system. And since April, I think India has been processing not all refineries, but yeah, most of the refineries have been processing Venezuelan crude. And even if you keep aside India's recent months import of Venezuelan crude, it's nothing new to the Indian system. India was processing at one time high of 2016, 17, 18, and then when you again had US issues with Venezuelan, and then there was an embargo on Venezuelan crude. But since then, some private refiners had a special arrangement for the crude, and India was processing, like, till last year, May 2025 also, India, some refiners were processing. So it's not new to India, but yeah, I think it's one of the best thing to have happened, because what India has received in April and in early part of May, Venezuelan crude was not a reaction to Strait of Hormuz, because what, for crudes from Latin Americas to America, we need to factor in they are traded 3-4 months in advance, because your transit time is 45 to 50 days, and then your crude buying cycle happens. So I think Venezuela crude is, I think it's a blessing in disguise for India.
Yeah. Let us come to some figures. Now, there have been some reports which you have also analyzed and you have also, added value to in connection with the numbers of the crude that we are importing from Venezuela. And I believe 427,000 BPD of Venezuelan crude has been imported over the past month. So, how does this change relate to when it comes to, the other the oil from the other nations that we'd been importing? Third largest country to have imported Venezuelan crude over this month. How has this change happened? Because this is, of course, much higher than what we were doing in the same time the previous year. Last year
Yeah,
also, Delcy Rodriguez had visited India in February, and she had also participated in the India Energy Week. But what changed within this 1 year? Of course, the ouster of President Maduro was one of the major issues. The signing of a pact between Venezuela and US was another one. But it, of course, can we clearly say that it is, of course, because of the push by the US that India has also stepped in, and has capitalized on the Venezuelan crude availability in the energy market?
yeah, it is. I think if you look last year, same time, India imported just 60 kbd, and as of now, as we close May, India has imported around 270 kbd in May and around 290 kbd in April. Like, the factor that has led to increase in that there is more Venezuelan crude available in the market. And yeah, one of the major factor is like since before January, Venezuelan crude was a sanctioned crude. It's not that they were not producing crude; they were producing, selling, but only to China. But since all we know what happened in January, and there was a renewed focus even by U.S. administration and even by present Venezuelan administration to focus more on diversifying their customer base. And since then, I think India, Spain, Italy, there has been new countries or renewed look into Venezuelan trade. Yeah, so I think yes, India has improved its import via Venezuela drastically, and that helps also because see, India was importing medium to heavier grades from Iraq, Saudi Arabia, and Kuwait, and all. And since the Strait of Hormuz being choked, India's import from Iraq and Kuwait is negligible as of now. All, if not negligible, India didn't import any volume of Kuwaiti crude grades from last 2 months. So and the same time, this Venezuelan crude comes into picture. So it helps to balance, or it helps to balance India's crude processing rate.
Let me ask you, there's a report that mentions that, in fact, the import of Venezuelan crude to India is being facilitated by Chevron. That happens to be a US major. So clearly, we all know that despite the fact between Venezuela and US, the US Treasury Department is it is overseeing the oil revenue of Venezuela at the moment. So clearly, there are US facilitators, and when the US Secretary of State comes in India, before coming to India, remarks that they want to sell as much of energy to India as they want to, and also that there is possibility with Venezuelan crude, and he also happens to announce the visit much before than the Indian government. Clearly, there are, when people say that there are assumptions that it is the US that is facilitating this import, is that not closer to truth?
I think there are more details into this. I think it's not that only Chevron. There is Vitol, Trafigura. Even some countries are directly linked with PDVS. Again, I will go to my point. Like it's not new to India. India used to buy Venezuelan crude before that only. So there is some established supply chain route. But now what we are seeing there, we are seeing more free market. I think more traders are having Vitol, Trafigura, Chevron, unlike previous when only some refiners used to deal with PDVSA. And I think rather being driven into the point that US is facilitating India's energy demand, I think one should look at it suits India's economy. It suits India's crude processing basket. So and it's one of the as on date it's though the crude is very difficult to process, it's cheaper than what we have on others grade. Like even from Russia, you take it from Saudi Arabia with OSP so high and all. So it's a good techno commercial deal for India to buy as much as Venezuelan crude if they can process.
Right. So you mentioned that it is also cheaper. In fact, 2 months back, when I had been reporting on the same issue, there were a couple of experts who were of the opinion that in fact Venezuelan crude could be a lever to bargain with the Russians for cheaper Urals. So. Two months down the line, we are hearing that Venezuelan crude is cheaper than the other crude available in the market. How do we explain that?
Again, that is the point. I think again, see, Venezuelan crudes are not everyone's cup of tea. It's not
Yeah.
that easy to process like what you process even Urals or Middle Eastern grades. So there are some set of refiners that can process and at length. Like I can process some volume of crude for one time, but I cannot process that continuously. But India's refiners being complex and well driven, so they have the lever to continuously process Venezuelan crude and even or any heavier opportunistic crude. But again, talking on the prices, I think what we were discussing 2 months back, as of now, the market has fully changed. It's a 180-degree flip. There are certain reasons why Venezuelan crude is cheap, why it was not cheap a month back, but what is trading now. We have seen some decrease or some decline in the spot premiums and all, because again, it's mostly to deal with what the overall crude scenario we are seeing in terms of Asian, with China buying less, that has helped other Asian countries, be it India, Japan, Korea, to increase their volumes from other countries.
Okay. So you said that there are reasons why it is cheaper now. Would you please dwell on the reasons why it is cheaper now?
I think one of the major factors, if you look at China's import, I think for Asia's, China's is the major buyer of crude, and like their
Right.
May crude import is at a decade low, just
Okay.
6.3 million barrels a day. Like and in Q1, that is January, February, March, it was around 11.5. So they have
Okay.
reduced their intake by 5 million barrels a day
Okay.
because of high prices, high freight, high insurance, high premiums, and all. And that has held. And again, they can do that because they have lots of SPRs and inventory. So in turn, what that has done, that has held other Asian countries like India, Japan, Korea to get get the hands on the crude that is available, and since overall demand has gone down with China not buying as it was buying earlier.
I mean, that's an interesting point. You said that China is not buying as much of a crude that it would do earlier. I mean, of course, there's of course not much information that comes out of that country very easily. Does that mean that there are austerity measures? What's really happening?
I think there are a few things. They have the austerity measures. We know that from last 1.5 year, China has been buying crudes every month. Be it again, that makes the point also. Like crude was 60, $70 per barrel. They bought at it cheap, and now with crude at around 100, again, when you look at crude at 100, but landed cost is 20, $30 per barrel more than what the flat prices are when you add on different other levers of crude. So they're not buying now because they have the SPRs, they have the product inventories to tackle the situation. And in turn, what is happening? Like the other Asian countries, which are dependent on continuous supply and doesn't have much SPRs, have to buy it, and that has helped cool Asian market or overall east of Suez crude market in May.
Okay. You also mentioned that Venezuelan crude is not everybody's cup of tea. Now, this is especially important because, we have a major company, an Indian company, Reliance Industries, has become the third largest buyer of Venezuelan crude in May. And this is also significant because, the company was, in fact, discussing about purchasing Venezuelan crude much prior to the intake that is started. But there is one refinery in Gujarat that is much accustomed to processing of heavy crude from Venezuela, and that is the Jamnagar refinery. But talking about the other refineries, there are experts who point out that in fact our other refineries are not very accustomed to processing this heavy crude, and in fact they can only process this kind of heavy crude in some volumes and not continuously throughout. They'll be able to process heavy volumes of a heavy crude oil like a Venezuelan crude. So,
Yeah,
if you can please help us explain how India can think of dealing with that when it hopes to intake more of Venezuelan crude.
I think it depends from company wide policy and their refining configuration, and the most important factor is how ones do the crude blending and all, and it depends on what their product yield suits. And I think Reliance, as we all know, it's one of the world's largest complex refiners. Like they process from Canada's TMX to to Saudi Arabia's Arab Superlight, from lowest API crude to highest API crude, because they have the best one of the best facilities in terms of crude blending. Their refining configuration suits that. On other hand, I don't. I will not say that other refiners can't process. You see, HMEL, Paradeep, Kochi, BPCL Kochi refinery. They can also they are quite complex. They can also process it, but there are larger questions in play. Like, do they want to? Because they, again, for them the most important situation is to manage the domestic supply chain, because with these hard crudes you have, there's a chances of more operational disturbances happening. Yeah, so there are many other factors that comes into play while processing these crudes at length.
What are these operational, problems that can possibly happen?
So mostly what happens like Indian refiners, like mostly the PSUs are designed for processing Arab heavy or Arab mixed grades and at
Right.
continuous process. So for a time being, you can adjust that by processing lower volumes of Maya, Mere or other grades, but at processing at volumes at constant and at continuous duration, it starts to hit your configuration because these heavy grades have heavy bottoms and all, and 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 for that our some refineries are not designed for that, some are designed for that. So again, it's a very refinery specific point, like what suits them in terms of processing, in terms of their what's the supply needed. And
Yeah, that's a very important point you made. I would also like to highlight what the MEA has said on Delcy Rodriguez's visit to India that starts tomorrow. Now, the MEA spokesperson has clarified that energy is definitely one of the likely topics that are going to be discussed, and this clearly means that there is possibility of India looking at more Venezuelan oil imports. So that is very clear to us. But how do you see the refineries adjusting to this possibility of more volumes of such heavy crude emerging out of Venezuela?
I think it's a positive sign only. I don't think there's any negative sides to look at because it opens up more source for India to diversify its energy, and it helps India to bargain the prices also.
Right. And do you see that there is going to be a possibility where the Russian oil possibly becomes more cheaper to us because we are one of the largest purchasers of Russian oil as well?
I think if, even if you look at now, I think what we are hearing, I think we don't track prices, but whatever we are hearing from our different trading sources, like Russian crude has become cheaper, like what it was in
Right.
prime March and April when everyone was scrambling to buy any crude they can get their hands on. So I think Russian crude has dropped by $5 to $7 already, and
Right.
further dropping it will depend on the overall larger Strait of Hormuz situation. If more volumes get available in next 3 to 4 months, yeah, we will be again back to what we were in January, February.
Right. So that clearly means that this might be a very limited interjection, an interjection that is limited for a couple of months, if we can put it that way.
Yeah, it is. But again, for India's perspective, I think the diversification is the only place to go because we don't produce much oil what we consume, and I think with and if we have any direct trade partnership with Venezuela, particularly with crude, I think it's a good done deal.
Right. There's a very interesting, bit of information about Venezuelan crude. Now, Venezuela happens to have the largest crude reserves, up to 303 barrels of crude reserves. Now, that's huge amount of oil. But very interestingly, there are reports that suggest that the production is only about 1%, although it's now growing because US majors have entered Venezuela once again after the ouster of President Maduro and the pact between US and Venezuela. But can Venezuelan crude cater to the Indian energy for a longer time with this kind of product, with this level of production?
I think we need to see like how the supply growth happens. Again, Venezuelan crude or any other particular country specific crude cannot cater alone India's growing demand. I think even if the volume is available, India will be looking to diversify as far as it can, and also the Strait of Hormuz situation more has pointed out the more focus on diversification on. But coming back
Right.
to Venezuelan point, I think having reserves and having current supply are
True.
two different things. Like they might have more reserve, but if their supply is like, I think though it has grown by 200 300 kbd since January, but I think yeah, they
Right.
are still very low. And given the amount of investments needed and also the hardships of this product crude production is not that easy that it will be there we will be seeing exponential growth. We are seeing some growth on Venezuelan crude production, but not at the level that it can cater to any particular demand per se.
Very interestingly, even this is a result of the US sanctions that were, imposed on Venezuela, I think back in 2019, if I'm correct. But how do we view the future of, Indian energy basket? Now we've seen that our energy imports from Saudi Arabia have declined significantly over the past couple of months. I think Iraq and Kuwait have, the imports that they would send to India have reduced to a very, very significant number. So, how do you view the Indian energy basket, especially the crude basket, vis-a-vis the importers that we have in Gulf and across the globe? How do you see the
I
changes?
think as of now the situation is a bit difficult because of Strait of Hormuz situation and Iraq and Kuwait not able to export anything out of the Gulf. So that's why the prime reason for decline. But going forward, see, you cannot let go Middle East because it's a 7 days, 6 to 7 days voyage, and it's a constant supply. We have good term deals or good deals with Middle East. So going forward, I think Middle East will remain India's one of the major what is major partner in terms of oil. But I think overall we might be seeing more diversification post. But there's an interject also, like at the end of the day, it depends on refining economics. Like it's good to say diversification from let's buy from Latin America, America, US, everywhere. But at the end of the day, it's the refiners' final veto has to go in, because if that trade happens to suit their economics, yeah, they will buy even from Canada. If that is not suiting their economics, refiners will not buy even from Saudi Arabia or Kuwait. If that is not in terms, so yeah, I think you cannot rule out Middle East. It will be one of the major contributors to India's growing energy demand.
Right. Here, I must mention the impact of the UAE's exit from the OPEC as well. We've seen that our supplies from UAE have increased, in fact. Now, how do you see that playing out in the coming months? Is the UAE going to be the major supplier of crude to India when it comes to Middle East?
I think UAE will be one of the major suppliers going forward, but in next to near term we need to see how the Strait of Hormuz situation develops. But UAE's OPEC move, coming out of OPEC, and I think it's a positive sign also for India because they will be increasing their production. I think that's the one of the major point why they have moved out. And also, if you look at the wider picture of India UAE energy landscape, with Prime Minister also flowing down last month, and with India's UAE having interest in India's strategic reserves already, and India looking to build more strategic reserves, be it crude, be it LPG. I think, yeah, UAE will be one of the major partner for India's,
Right.
and one of the strategic partner, not just in economic.
True. So at the moment, we're also looking at, some history when it comes to the purchase of Venezuelan oil. Uh, I realized that even in 2008, it was in that year that India had actually entered the Venezuelan crude market. So our ties with Venezuela go back to, at least one or two decades. Now, in 2012 also, I think our major ONGC Videsh had entered the Venezuelan market, and that had also started purchases. So clearly, Venezuelan crude is not new to Indian oil, Indian energy basket. But how do you look at the changes within the volume of what was being imported from Venezuela? Of course, the volume that was being imported down, way back in 2012. From there, we've grown much more, and now in May, Venezuela had become the third largest importer to India when it comes to crude. So how do you see this panning out in the near future? Do you see volumes being increased to a significant level, or do you see only a limited increase in volumes because of the situation of our refineries, which can only process possibly some volumes of heavy crude?
I think we have already seen a steep increase, and it's not just India's cannot import or process. You have to also look at the upstream of Venezuela. Like, do they have that incremental supply to process, to provide to the market? I don't think so. Again, coming back to the point, like we have seen Venezuelan crude production going up, but it's not at the exponential level. So I think what we are seeing in May, June. I think June will be the new high. We might see around 350 to 400 kbd of Venezuelan crude import, but it will be around at that reason also, because US is one of the important consumer of that crude alone also.
So, in the near future, I mean, if I can ask you to compare what is happening right now and what is possible in the near future, what is the difference in the imports? Like, I remember that once there was a mention about Venezuelan crude, of course, Venezuela has become the third largest importer to India when it comes to crude. But still, there is a vast difference between what the second major importer is sending to India and what Venezuela is doing. So I believe there's a huge gap between the two, is it?
Yeah, it is. I think if you look from the starting also, I think India is importing roughly 2 million barrels per day, and from Venezuela, India imported around 300, around three 300, approximately 300 in May. So there is a steep gap.
Right. So what leads to this gap? And how do you see this panning out in the future? Do you see this coming closer, or is
No,
it
I
going
don't
to be?
think coming. I don't think that coming closer. I think whatever we see now will be moving going forward again, because of the primary region is like, does Venezuela have crude production like what Russia has? No, their crude production is just 10 10 to 15% of what Russia does. So that's one of the major reasons.
Right. So clearly, at the moment, it seems that this interjection of Venezuelan crude in the Indian energy market is going to be possibly limited in a way that it helps our refineries process heavy crude in some volumes, and not that the refineries are going to be are going to change the course towards their purchase of heavy crude from Venezuela entirely. And in the larger run, I think, like you rightly mentioned, that it is going to be oil from the Persian Gulf and also Russia that we are going to be dependent on. So in the next year, I mean, if I mean, just a hypothetical situation that the Strait of Hormuz is open, and of course, we're looking at things, or also, of course, they're moving in a direction where, the U.S. administration and the Iranian side is looking at an effort to mediate. But still, I mean, if in that scenario where Strait of Hormuz opens up, do you still feel that the largest importers are going to be the same, or there will be, a major change in, the names of the importers that are going to provide India with the maximum crude oil?
I don't think there will be a big bang change happening. I think we will be going back to what we have. But again, there will be more focus on diversification rather than being dependent on any single region. And also, because again, you need to understand, I think for Middle East as a whole is one of the biggest producers in the world. So you cannot hide from the fact. Yeah, it will be one of the major trading partners in terms of crude and LPG once the situation cools down.
This is also interesting because UAE has moved out of OPEC, and of course it's going to be offering oil at a much larger level than it was doing previously. But does it also mean that the major Gulf producers, including the Saudi Arabia, including Kuwait, including Iraq, for example, Iraq has been one of the worst hit nations when it comes to oil supply. So do we see that they are also going to significantly lower the cost of the oil that they are going to send out? And I mean, do you see in the near future India and other Asian majors taking an advantage of that situation?
I think it depends on the day to day and also the time of the situation, because as of now, again, there is no point market has to cool down in May. Like the crude prices, what we were in April, and by May it has gone 5 to $15 per barrel lower. So there are larger interest in pay how much the demand will be, what other countries will be buying or not. But yeah, I think as and when there is more supply happening, you might be seeing more competition in terms of selling, and we might see some impacts on prices and discounts. But yeah, it's very hard to say as of now. Like these countries will be reducing their OSPs or not.
All right. So thank you, Sumit. That was a very enlightening talk. Of course, we've got to know a lot from you when it comes to the situation of our refineries, the pricing, and also how Venezuelan crude is not new to India, but in fact, like you rightly pointed out, that it's been one crude oil that we have looked at in the past as well. But clearly, it's the difference between the volumes that we are going to import, because there's the devil is always in the details. So we'll keep tracking Kpler reports and reports from you to have a look at what kind of volumes are we importing from Venezuela and other nations. Thank you so much for talking to India Abroad, and keep contributing and keep helping us with more inputs. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.